That's fine. Okay. You don't need to turn up the volume too much out these speakers, but as long as it's coming into the video, that's fine, because I think you guys can hear me without it, so we'll just use it as like I'm recording on the video, but you don't need to hear me. Does that make sense? Because you can all hear me, because I can speak really loud. Even without it, I still sound pretty much exactly the same. So, I'll use the microphone, and we'll see what happens. Okay, first thing I want to ask, there are 2 questions I have. Don't think too much. But when I say heaven, I want you to think of the first word that comes into your head. Okay, don't tell me, but I say heaven. Okay? Now remember this, because it's going to come up later. Secondly, I want you to think of, in like 4 or 5 words, or maybe 1 sentence, describe heaven. Okay? Just like give the answer that first comes to your head. Okay, we're going to start at the beginning, and then we'll end up at heaven a little bit later on. So where have we been? Week 1, this one's called Finding Our Way Out and Back. Out of hyperreality and back into reality. So let's do a summary of where we've been. In week 1, we defined hyperreality. I think this is the next slide now. Cool. We defined hyperreality, and we said it was a cultural phenomenon that comes in 3 parts. Hyperconsumerism, mass media, and rampant individualism. Okay? What do you guys think hyperreality was? Like, that's what I defined it as, but what did people take out of it? That's not good. Do I need to get my notes from week 1 and do it again? What's hyperreality? Matthew? Break the ice. Can people move in a little bit? We're all friends here. I know all of you, like, on a first-name basis. It's not like there's some weird big mega church where we don't know everyone. Like, you can all come in a bit closer. Hyperreality. Matthew, what is it? It's true. This is the best thing about asking the pastor. You only have to ask 1 question to 1 person because he gives you the perfect answer. That's exactly right. Let's look up here. Did I put down some answers? No, maybe I didn't. Here's the next question. If you could guess 1 movie that talks about hyperreality, what would it be? Great Gatsby. Yes, that's actually a really good one. That's not the one I had in mind, but that is a very good one. If you could guess 1 movie, The Great Gatsby. Total Recall, yeah, that's really good as well. The Matrix, that's one I picked up on. It's the most obvious. Yeah, well done. You win the prize. Do we have a video clip? I want to play this video clip, and then we're gonna. This I think summarizes it nicely as well.
Here you go, buddy. Breakfast of champions.
If you close your eyes, it almost feels like you're eating runny eggs.
You know, a bowl of snot.
Do you know what it really reminds me of?
Still buffering, maybe? Do you know what it really reminds me of? Reminds me of Tasty Wheat. Does anyone know what Tasty Wheat is? I don't even know what Tasty Wheat is.
Tasty Wheat. Did you ever eat Tasty Wheat?
No, but technically neither did you.
Well, that's exactly my point. Exactly. Because you have to wonder now. Now, how do the machines really know what Tasty Wheat tasted like, huh? Maybe they got it wrong. Maybe what I think Tasty Wheat tasted like actually tasted like oatmeal or tuna fish. That makes you wonder about a lot of things. You take chicken, for example. Maybe they couldn't figure out what to make chicken taste like, which is why chicken tastes like everything. And maybe they couldn't figure out...
It's a single-celled protein combined with synthetic aminos, vitamins, and minerals. Everything the body needs.
It doesn't have everything the body needs.
Okay. That's the question of hyperreality in a movie. That whole movie, if you look at it through the lens of hyperreality, is actually an incredible movie. What does Tasty Wheat taste like? Do we even know? Because the machines were feeding it to them. They were just feeding. There we go, right? But kind of. It's kind of getting there. But it's kind of been devoid. And when you get back into reality, sometimes you're not quite sure what reality is supposed to taste like because you've been fed these things for so long. Then in week 2, last week, we talked about the effects that hyperreality has on us. So first week we defined it. Second week we talked about what it does. And we talked about some of the facts of life that hyperreality has no satisfactory answers for. So the effects of hyperreality: choice anxiety. Remember that one? That's the I don't know what choice to make because I've got so many options. So many options which all seem possible. Then you've got comparison anxiety, which is where we compare decisions beforehand, but then also, and where it's probably most prevalent, is after we've made the decision, we don't actually receive the full joy of living in this reality that we've chosen because we're always comparing to, what if I did this? What if I had done this? And so we live in this fantasy world imagining what had happened before. What could have happened if we had have chosen something else. And these are all things that hyperreality feed at us. The other things that hyperreality has no answers for: it's glamorous and it's glitzy, but life is often boring and mundane. Life, you have to work. Well, The Great Gatsby maybe didn't, but most of us have to work. There are consequences in real life, but in hyperreality we're never presented with them. In the real world, we're full of injustice, but you struggle to find a Hollywood movie which actually portrays injustice. We experience pain and suffering. In most movies, you don't see that unless that's the point of the movie, or on TV, or in advertising, or whatever. And then we die. And hyperreality can't actually answer all these things. It doesn't satisfy us. So what I want to look at this week is this: hyperreality and Christianity. What happens when it invades Christianity and influences our thought. Where true hope is actually found. And then how to embrace God's reality. I'm actually thinking that we're going to do that one next week because Matthew's asked me to talk again next week. And next week is not going to be me talking so much, but it's going to be a series of questions, and we're going to start discussing some stuff about how we can, as Oasis, we can actually respond, which is going to be pretty cool. So let's start up by looking at hyperreality in the modern world, especially as it relates to spirituality. Not just Christianity, but let's start with spirituality as a whole. So Mark Sayers, the guy who writes the book, who I'm totally plagiarizing everything from, describes the way that your spiritual beliefs and the hyperconsumer culture interact. And he gives us this diagram. Okay? It's like a trinity, but it's not actually the trinity, just in case you're wondering. So what you have is you have 3 sides of this, or 3 points of the trinity. At the top you have the distant God. Everyone believes in, most people in the world believe in God, let's be honest. But most people don't know what they actually mean. Or they think it's some distant God like the Force from Star Wars, some higher being, some cosmic power, something like that. Maybe someone like Krishna or something like that. But the thing they all have in common between all these people is they actually can't define him. Because they say, well, you can never know. I believe that he exists, but you can never know. And the thing about the distant God is the distant God can never say anything about your life. Because you can't know him, or her, or it, or them. So there is no more authority with God. So what happens is that the bottom left side of the Trinity up here, you become God. And this is the individualism. All authority begins to rest with you. You decide what's best for your life. You decide what's right and wrong. You decide what is sin, to use a Christian word. And everything revolves around you, and everyone revolves around you. And so hyperconsumerism actually tells you this as well. It tells you that the whole of your life is about what you desire, what you want, what you need, and your personal life project, or, the project of your life. And so all of these, the fact that God is distant, the fact that authority rests with you, and the fact that consumerism is telling you it's all about you, it strengthens the belief that you are the center of the universe, and let's be honest, God is totally irrelevant. The third part is consumerism is folk religion. There's a difference between high religion and folk religion. High religion asks the questions like, where do we come from? What is the meaning of life? How was the world created? Those sorts of things, right? Folk religion is more your everyday life. You can go into some cultures where they'll say, I'm a Muslim. But when you look at how they live, they actually participate in witchcraft and other things which the Quran actually forbids. Same with Christians. We say, I'm a Christian, but we do lots of things in our life that the Bible actually forbids. And this is the difference between folk religion and high religion. High religion is like kind of the purest form, if I don't want to use that word, but it's the upper form, and then the folk religion is the things that govern our lives every day. So Consumerism speaks to our everyday, or to these people's everyday, those who don't have a God or have this distant God. And it offers them the solutions and the distractions and the hopes that seem to fix your needs. Okay, so what's the result? You get a hugely vicious circle, because the distant God will provide you with no right or wrong. You are ultimately the boss, and consumerism is reinforcing this message, obviously. So you pursue materialism and hedonism, and I should be as happy as I want. And it turns into this directionless downward spiral, and you end up in a world which looks remarkably like... Sorry, can you go back one? You end up in a world which looks remarkably like Big Brother. Who's seen that show? That's a whack show. Basically, it's just a bunch of self-obsessed hedonists sit around the house and talk about their sex lives. And they use drugs and things like this. But the funny thing is that it's actually a metaphor for people who are trapped in hyperreality. Because they don't know that they're free, but they are. They're captured in this prison of pleasure. You know, in the Big Brother house, everyone's having fun. Everyone's yay, have sex with everyone. But somehow they're still trapped there, even though they don't know it. So let's look at Christianity, because we could kind of go, oh, well, we've got Jesus, and obviously he would go at the top of that. But the problem is that he doesn't for most of us. So what we get is, it's the same Trinity, the same three-sided triangle of our lives. And what happens is that Jesus replaces the distant God, but he actually has no authority over your life. And you don't give him the authority. That's why he doesn't have it. Now, I know this is not everyone, but it's also in different areas of your life as well. It's not like Jesus is totally in charge or totally not. Some areas of your life he is, and some areas he isn't. Okay? So what happens is that we don't give authority to Jesus. So it still rests with us. We still become the dictators of what's right and wrong. And still we subconsciously look to some form of consumerism, even if that manifests itself in how we choose a church, or how we worship God, or I like this worship band, or something like that. And that consumerism helps us deal with our everyday lives. But we're still searching after this consumerism. We're not actually searching after God. So what happens is that Jesus at the top becomes like that really cool waiter in the hip cafe that you all know, who looks like a hipster, and he doesn't really care about the rules too much because he just wants you to have a good time. That's how we kind of look at Jesus. Or he's that firefighter, the cosmic butler, the insurance agent, where, let's be honest, the only time you actually pray is when that hits the fan. Or, if you know what I mean. But then he quietly leaves so he doesn't cramp our style as we go on living the rest of our lives. But the thing is this, the Jesus, so can you go forward too? Actually, that's a good one. What the heck does that Jesus there have to say to any powers or principalities or idols in our lives? He's got nothing. What does he have to say about life after death? Very little. What does he have to say to people who are starving, or trapped in prostitution, or people who've been abused, or with dysfunctional families, or with diseases, or even survivors of the Holocaust? What does he even have to say to them? Nothing. Nothing whatsoever. Because he has no good news. Because he has no plan for the world. And this is how a lot of Christians think about Jesus. So I think we need to rediscover Jesus. And I know that a lot of us are not quite at the end of the spectrum that I've just portrayed. A lot of us are more kind of, maybe I would suggest halfway in the middle. I certainly am. And as we go through this, I'll share a little bit more about that. So we need to rediscover what is Jesus' role at the top of the pyramid. So the point of Jesus, that's a big question. Let's go to the next one. We need to, in Jesus, we see God's entire plan to bring about reality for the world. Let me say that again, because this is important. In Jesus, we encounter God's entire plan to bring about reality for the world, for your life. So we kind of need to make sure we encounter him correctly, because if we get it wrong, we don't understand God, and we don't understand God's plan. So a good place to start is looking at a metaphor that Jesus uses in John 6:35-36. He says, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never be thirsty. But as I have told you, you have seen me, and still you do not believe. Bread of life is one of those awkward Christian cliches that everyone forgets about, because let's be honest, your parents said it, and it's just almost meaningless. The bread of life, okay, kind of means, okay, we eat him, that's communion, cool, and the Catholics take it a little bit more literally. Okay, go on to the next point. Where's he going to give me all my wealth and riches? But let's take another look at it, because it's actually an incredibly powerful one. Because we need to look at what Jesus means when he says bread. Because for us, we don't think of anything. I think of like white sliced bread that I'll buy down at 7-Eleven, and it's tasteless, and it's rubbish, and it has no flavor, and very little nutritional value, and just stuffs up my stomach, right? But that's not what it meant in Jesus' day. Jesus is an Arab, okay? So what that means is that he lives in an Arab context. Now, in an Arab context, who likes Middle Eastern food? I'm going to put 2 hands up. Because I love Middle Eastern food. It has to be some of the, I mean, aside from Tex-Mex, has to be some of the most delicious food in the world. Like, it really is good. So, within this context of the Middle Eastern food, you get Jesus saying, I am the bread of life. Okay, so what does bread mean? It means a few things. First of all, I'm going to tell you a story. I went around to a friend of mine's house called Mo. Well, his name is Moafak Amso. But he's Iraqi, okay? And I went around to his house because he was one of my sponsors to come here and work as a missionary. And he had invited me around to meet his entire family. And when I say his entire family, I mean his entire family. These Middle Eastern people love to get their families around. And they had spent days preparing this meal. Like, literally 2 or 3 days, because even months, because like there was dried sausage there, which they'd been hanging for months and decided to pick it out just for this occasion. Like, so you sit down at the Middle Eastern food, this table with all this delicious food in front of you, and then what you notice is that at the center of the table in every meal is the bread. Always the bread. And this is so pivotal. Because Jesus is saying that just like when you guys, the Arabs back in those days, sit down and eat your meals and the bread is at the center, I am the bread at the center of the table of your life. I am the bread at the center of the world. He is the center of everything, okay? And most of us don't believe that because we don't think he actually makes a difference in our lives. He's just that insurance payout when things go wrong, and then we get on with our lives. So here's what I mean. Here's what I mean just to illustrate the point. Have you ever actually considered what Jesus thinks about art? I know you have. You probably have. But has anyone, have you considered what does Jesus think about art, right? Or what does he think about politics? I mean, maybe if you're American, you have thought that. What about business? What does he have to say about business or accounting or finance or mergers, acquisitions? What does he have to say about that? What does he have to say about sports? Rugby? Does he even care? Is it just irrelevant? What does he think about tax? I mean, right? What does he think about leisure, going on holiday, running? What does he think about music? Right? These are things that we have every day of our life, and yet we still don't see him as the center of them. Like, we don't really know what he thinks about these things. Because what happens is that our gospel and our Christianity is what I call a gospel of, let's go to the next one, the gospel of do not. We turn Christianity into this gospel of what you do not do. You ask non-Christians, or even some Christians, what's the difference between your life and a non-Christian? They'll say, well, Christians do not do this. Christians do not do that. Christians do not. You might get a few do's. We go to church. We read the Bible. We pray. But the majority of it is what we don't do. Because we're defining ourselves by what we don't do. And it's ridiculous. Because it's now a gospel of how you shouldn't live. Not a gospel of how you should live. It's not like Jesus is actually adding anything to the meal. He's just taken everything away. Right? So what happens then is that because we have this gospel which says we shouldn't do this, then what happens is that where do we get how